many things that happened on 80s, it still happen today. We're quite in the same situation. Can we say that Physical, despite being a series set about 30 years ago, is still very actual?
I do. I think it's a great examination of where we are now and how we got there. And this is really such a crucial turning point in history in terms of Ronald Reagan coming to power and women finding their own agency, particularly within the health space, which is what Physical examines. And the rise of the cult of personality and infomercials and all these things which would eventually lead to now where we are, which is, you know, everyone has an app and a platform and a streaming service and so on and so forth. So it almost feels quaint to look back at this time of, you know, and sort of antiquated, but it's so informative, right? Like all of history. So, it's become even more, you know, obvious to me how interesting this is as a story to examine.
Rose, how is the relationship with Sheila's inner voice going this new season? Will it be less aggressive and more conciliatory or not? Is she working on that?
I actually did a lot less voiceover this season because she's in her, you know, quote unquote recovery. But then it comes back with a vengeance. And what I love about the voiceover is it's very something like a texture we kind of layer on at the end, and we do it in the booth a lot, and it really evolves as the edit evolves. But I enjoy that process, and I find it very creative. So it's the inner voice is very present, but the world in general really opens up this season. So there's a lot more about the other characters and the other worlds, whether it's Paul Sparks' character or Deirdre's character, and you know, so that I think the audience I think will enjoy. Yeah.
In which way Greta and Sheila's complicated friendship relationship evolve in this new season? Will their friendship always experience up and downs? How important is the presence of Greta in the Sheila's life?
I think Greta is very important to Sheila. I actually do think Greta is at least a part of what helps Sheila open up. I used to always tease Rose in the first season that I think Sheila is Greta's best friend. I don't know that Sheila would say that Greta or vice versa. Anyway, but in this season, I think they actually truly become good friends and a little bit more like equals. And I think it's huge for both women. You know, I think female relationships can be complicated, and I think that it helps both women grow and change and evolve and figure out what they want, which is really critical to explore. I loved it.
I have a music question for both of you. What is your favorite song or musical from those days, the 80s? And how is your life memories related to the Olivia Newton-John song Physical?
I don't have a ton of memories of the 80s because I was still very young, so I'm like happy to say that, but I'm actually happy to say that. That's such a ageist thing for me to say, but yeah, I love 80s music. 80s music was so fun and like poppy and
poppy, and,
you know.
Yeah.
Rory, we find again Danny, the political phase of the series in a certain way, in a new situation after the defeat in the election campaign. This season, he will work more on being a perfect father, right? It can almost be said that the roles between Danny and Sheila have reversed. She has the power now, and he have to sustain her in a certain way. Is it right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And I think what's exciting about it, at least for me as an actor and stepping into that character, is that any kind of dynamic shift like that, it kind of gives you something new to play with in the season. So I was thrilled to read the scripts and realize that Danny was now going to have to try to become a better father, less focused on himself, less selfish, and sort of take a back seat to the success that Sheila was having. It's kind of great because Danny is so he's so egotistical that, you know, it's crushing for him inside, but also, you know, he is aware enough that it's for the good of his family, and if he wants to try to save his marriage, he's got to step it up and kind of be a more enlightened person.
In the 80s, at the top of the consumerism made by Ronald Reagan presidency, it was important to present yourself to the world beautiful, perfect, successful. This is exactly what happened today with the beautiful and smiling images that we must necessarily show to the social media, Instagram in first place. Do you find any similarities between these two days, these two moments?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it can be destructive. I think it can be. I think when we specifically place in the highest position the constant need of worrying about how you look and worrying about at least by today's standard, the content that you're creating to give people, to like put yourself out there as a product, I think it can be very damaging because it sort of takes you away from maybe your true sense of self. In terms of this show, I think it's really what makes all the characters interesting, namely Sheila, who's going through that in the most intense way, quite literally becoming a product while at the same time trying to maintain internally her own sense of sanity and trying to maintain who she thinks she is. And I think that's why there's such a struggle in their marriage, because Danny is similar, only his is currently without any sort of financial success. His is having to be internal. He's not becoming a product. He's sort of finding out that people would rather him be sort of in the shadows and in the back seat than leading the way. And it kind of crushes him a bit, but you know, it can be a positive kind of change for him at least.
What is your favorite song or musical from those years, the 80s?
There's so many I think I could go with, but I think Simple Minds from The Breakfast Club, Don't You Forget About Me, hits every single time. But look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm not a Peter Cetera fan. I could go Glory of Love any day of the week.
What was it like to enter in this energetic but also complex world of physical? What did you excited most?
Oh wow. I really loved the first season for many reasons. One of them being that, you know, I grew up in the 80s, so there's a lot of familiar things for me, a lot of nostalgic things. So like I was excited to step into that world. And I think the show is really beautifully written. It's funny, like it's written in there's a lot of levels, I guess, to the way that it's written, in that it's like, it's really funny and there's great dialogue. It also like, these characters are written in a really beautifully complex way. I love to dance. But I, haven't really done much aerobics. So that was a great challenge. And, it's an amazing team on this show, and there's incredible choreographers, and, so that was super fun and challenging.
The story of Sheila, this smart and complicated woman in business, with one foot in one decade and one foot in another, is very loud and clear in this series. There are a lot of themes that we can see in this season. There is the equality in the workspace between men and women and the equal pay. We see Danny, who in the first season was the protagonist of the family, that now stays at the back of Sheila. Can we say that those social changes are the protagonists of the second season?
Yes, exactly. I think season 2, we are getting into some of the really changing times of the 70s turning into the 80s in America. And we're seeing that through the evolution of this marriage, right? So as Sheila's star begins to rise, she's challenging the setup in her home, which has always been all of the domestic duties fall on her. So she turns to her husband and says, it's time for you to step up. And to her surprise, he does. So he's going to start to try to put his money where his mouth is and try to take up some of the slack on the home front. And we get to see how some of that plays out this season.
Annie, in the 80s, at the top of the consumerism made by Ronald Reagan presidency, it was important to present everyone to the world beautiful, perfect, successful, thin. This is exactly what happens today with the beautiful and smiling image that we have necessary to show on social media, Instagram in first place.
Yes.
Do you find any similarities?
Yes, it's a great question, and I think there are so many parallels, and it's one of the pleasures of setting a show 40 years ago in this time of change is there are so many parallels today. So as the 70s shifted into the 80s, in the culture where I grew up in Southern California, you saw this shift in values from the liberal ideals to the more conservative capitalistic ideals in California, which was the birthplace of Ronald Reagan. And we're seeing a similar shift today. We're seeing a shift to the right in this country, and we're seeing a focus on the exterior instead of the interior that's been, helped along by technology. So it's fun to, and I think it's interesting to explore those parallels. I think it gives us lessons we can use today.